Chapter 26, Phases of Erland, 1968 through 1985. She opened the letter and a picture fell out. It was a photo of her baby boy grinning ear to ear. From the letter, Lillian learned that Erland was not just pulling up and walking around the furniture holding on anymore. He was officially a walker. She was so grateful for the picture, but longed to actually hold her son. It had been a solid 5 weeks since she had seen him, since she gave him up. Lillian was having longing pangs for her child, but insisted within herself that she had made the right decision. Her mind drifted to the habit her baby boy had each night before he fell asleep. He would cry desperately to be rocked to sleep in the arms of his mother, and each night he continued frantically until she did. As she would pluck him from the crib, Erland would face plant into her shoulder, forehead first, then slide his face into her neck. He systematically placed his eyes into the curvature of her neck. It took everything for her to keep herself from giggling when he blinked. Each blink gave a tickle from his eyelashes, so long and thick. The breath from his mouth warmed another spot of her neck. On the opposite side, his tiny fisted paw would get entangled into his mother's long hair by him grabbing and twisting at it. This was his constant ritual each and every night for the last few months of his time with his natural mother. Now, all she had left were the memories: eyelash tickle, warm breath, pulled hair. She didn't cry that day. Lillian became lost in the reminiscence while gazing at the picture and wondering if he could possibly remember her and their bedtime routine. She secretly wished he could remember, while genuinely hoping he couldn't. Nights were grueling because of this. Days were unbearable for so many dozens of other reasons. What made living with herself possible was that Lillian had convinced herself that it was all for the sake of her son and his own social, emotional, mental, and psychological well-being. It would be a year before she saw him again, and what a tragic year it had been for her. She put on weight in her belly area, acquired more gray hairs than her age would have suggested, and spent multiple days visiting doctors for extreme headaches and joint pain. Lillian was severely depressed. She knew her child was in good hands. It wasn't that. Her maternal need for him was just itching her to see him. Lillian packed up her daughters and their nanny and hopped on the road and headed to Louisiana to see her son. The new nanny Lillian hired after the death of Ben was an older lady with adult children who had been widowed for over a decade. Lil took advantage of this by dragging her on every whim. Her name was Stella. She had a strong faith in God, a glow about herself, and tended to feel sorry for Lillian. Being one of 14 children and having dozens of first cousins, Stella couldn't figure how Lil could have no relatives on her side or her late husband's side to help her with these young babies. She was also quite confused when she began working for them, by young Nancy always talking about her brother, Earl, with Lil dismissing her comments completely. Stella would say, if the child has an imaginary friend, this type of thing needs to be addressed. Stella believed if a 2 or 3-year-old has an imaginary friend, the grown-ups should welcome the friend and include it in conversations and playtime. What Stella didn't know was that the boy was no figment of his sister's imagination. He was sent away to live with his cousin. He was the only reason for the frequent trips they took to Louisiana. The reason they would be left in hotel rooms for hours each time Lillian needed to go, quote unquote, take care of business. Over time, Nancy's mind may have repressed the memory of Earl because she stopped bringing him up altogether before too long. The girls and Stella remained in the hotel room in Lafayette while Lillian drove to Pecan Grove to handle some business. Lillian had packed toys and other essentials for the girls and a book and newspaper for Stella to read while Lil was out. Lil drove up to the house and exited the car, slamming her sweater in the door. Her adrenaline was intense. The young family was sitting outside, awaiting her arrival. Lou gave a tight hug to Bobby, one to Wah, and a hug and a paper doll coloring book to Robbie Ang. She looked down at the boy, dressed in a sailor suit with white stride-right leather walkers, who was busy trying to catch a butterfly. His now black hair was parted to the side and combed over neatly with curls kicking up at the ends. He had lost some of the baby look, but still kind of fluffy with what baby fat was left. She snatched him up from the ground to give a good squeeze, one she had only been daydreaming about. He smelled so good. Earl turned from her, pointed, and said, "The puppy." Lil said, "Yes, that is a puppy." She then tried to get him to put his head on her shoulder, as he had done so many times before, unprompted. He pulled away. After snapping a picture and noticing what happened, Bobby said, "He's at that busy stage. He's not interested in hugging and keeping still. He wants to discover the world." Lou tried to act unoffended, but she was hurt deep down in her heart. "Yeah, I know. You can't blame me for trying, though. He's so cute and sweet," Lou said as she grabbed Earl's full cheek, making a scrunched-up face while saying the word sweet. Lou put the toddler down and sat next to Hua on the porch. The children played with the puppy in the grass while the adults drank coffee and had a long conversation. "Did you get the paperwork in the mail, Lou?" Bobby asked solemnly. Lou didn't look up, only staring into her coffee cup, said, "I did. I guess it's official now, huh?" She looked up at her cousin and his wife with tears in her eyes and said, "He's your baby boy now." Wah felt sorry for Lillian and added, "You don't have to do this. I love him and I want to be his mom. I want to raise him. But if you choose otherwise, I will be okay," Wah insisted. "Lou, just come back to the Grove. Keep all your kids together," Bobby offered. "It's not that easy. Can't you understand?" "I understand how you feel, but it doesn't have to be as complex as you're making it either." "Bobby, I know what I'm doing, and it is the best thing for my children. All 3 of them. You'll see." Bobby lifted his eyebrows and threw his arms up in frustration. He truly had the best interest of all parties in mind. He understood Lou's thinking to some degree, but really didn't think she had considered everything. In that very instant, Earl walked up carrying a purple flower, which was actually considered a weed, and said, "Mama." He handed Wah the flower. Amidst the overwhelmingly loud silence, you could hear a gasp being sucked back in that Lou hadn't originally realized was spontaneously being expelled from her lips. She excused herself to the restroom, fleeing the porch. After a long hiatus in the restroom, when Lillian had collected her emotions, the whites of her eyes bloodshot with the outer flesh puffy and pink, she left the restroom and found her relatives sitting in the living room waiting for her return. The children were each sitting on the rug having a picnic lunch of peanut butter and apple jelly sandwiches with ice-cold milk. Wah was reading a book to them as they ate, while Bobby sat attentively listening and grinning. The whole scene brought warmth to Lou's heart, and a smile rested under her bright red, irritated nose. She felt like a tear wanted to come to her eyes, but she was completely dry of tears. That didn't stop her nose from running again. She reached over and pulled a tissue from the box on the heavily varnished end table next to the tapestry sofa and blew her nose. This distraction caught the attention of the entire family of 4. Leaving that day was easier than Lillian thought it would be. It was a trying day that also provided validation that she had made the right decision for her children. Her desire was to continue visiting Pecan Grove, but never again in the same way that this trip was done. Lillian knew that for the situation to work with undeniable success, she must remain a stranger to Earl. Before she left, Lou walked out of the door to take in the sight of the old pecan tree in the yard. She remembered being a child in Pecan Grove and thinking about how the pecan trees were placed randomly, but there were pecan trees in almost every yard in town. The town was no longer an actual grove or plantation then, but now there were even fewer pecan trees than from her own childhood. As she drove through town, she barely saw any. She knew stories from her great-grandmother telling her about the old days when there were acres and acres of pecan trees and rows and fields of other vegetation managed by slaves. Now, just a random tree of pecans here and there. Well, the tree she stood under in that moment was so old and magnificent, seemingly a survivor from the old days. Her only son, Earl, would grow up with this tree and its old branches and its tire swing and its fruit. Lillian stood under that tree in awe of God's wonder of a creation. She stooped down and grabbed up one pecan that she hid away in the pocket of her dress. Today, I will snack from this breathtaking plant. One day, I will be offered its fruit again, and my breath will be taken away by the gesture. Lillian never again stepped foot on the premises of the home while her son was growing up. Oh, but she stalked him. She spoke with Bobby often, with an occasional call from Wah to get reports on the happenings in Earl's life. She took cues and hints. They always seemed to include addresses and directions as necessary. For example, on occasion, he sang at churches they were not members of. Lillian was told how to get to each of those churches. Of course, she didn't make it to everything, but she didn't miss much. She remembers when he was 12 and he performed the role of King Monk Cut in a town theater production of The King and I. Earl forgot one of his lines, and Lillian so badly wanted to yell the words to him or even go down there and tell him the lines, but she refrained from doing so. She did, however, keep the playbill and place it into her stack of stuff she tucked away called Earl's Life in a Box. She also snapped a photo without him knowing from far away while he was on stage. That one she placed into her 1-hour photo booth envelope. When Earl graduated from high school, Lil was in attendance too. That was the day she, Bobby, and Wah had decided would be the day of reckoning. But Lillian got cold feet. Everything was not handled on her end, at home, with her daughters, her husband, and of course her other son. She did manage to snap a photo of Earl walking across the stage and getting the sheepskin, though. Always disguised, never brought attention to her presence, never brought attention to her own presence, never spoke to her cousin or his wife at any of those functions, only by long distance telephone or mail.